Hey there, I'm Liz Noraine. I'm from San Luis Potosí and hope you enjoy the video. World War II ended with the unconditional surrender of the Axis forces. The Germans first surrendered on 29 April 1945 in Italy after Hitler's death, and total unconditional surrender was signed on the 7th of May. By the 8th of May, Winston Churchill announced that the war had come to an end in Europe by announcing victory in Europe, a date that is still celebrated today. While people were celebrating in Europe, however, Japan still kept fighting. The atomic bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, respectively on the 6th and the 9th of August, however, forced the Japanese emperor to also surrender. This surrender happened on the 15th of August, but the surrender documents were only signed on 2nd September 1945, on the deck of the USS Missouri, officially marking the end of the war. Anticipating subsequent victory, the main Allied leaders, Roosevelt of the United States, Churchill of the United Kingdom, and Stalin of the Soviet Union, met in the city of Yalta to discuss the political future of Europe after the war. They outlined a plan to divide Germany into four zones of occupation: one French, one British, one American, and one Soviet zone. They also discussed for the future of Poland and Yugoslavia. Once the war was over, the Allied leaders signed the Berlin Declaration on June 5, 1945. This document proclaimed that they had assumed absolute dominion of the German territories. This declaration was drawn up a month later at the Potsdam Conference. In this meeting, the borders and zones of occupation were established for each of the Allies in Germany and Austria, as well as within the capital of Berlin. Despite their wartime alliance, tensions between the Soviet Union, the United States, and Great Britain intensified rapidly as the war came to a close and the leaders discussed what to do with Germany. Post-war negotiations took place at two conferences in 1945, the Yalta Conference and the Potsdam Conference. These conferences set the stage for the beginning of the Cold War and of a divided Europe. Another reason is that Roosevelt died and Harry Truman became president in early 1945. From the time Truman became president, relations between the two countries went downhill. Secondly, the Lend-Lease agreement between the two countries broke down. This was an agreement by which the United States provided food, planes, ships and other war material to the Soviet Union and the United Kingdom. Immediately after VE Day, the United States stopped all non-food aid to the Soviet Union, diverting these supplies to the Western Europe. Two final perceived indignities. Stalin was absolutely furious that neither Roosevelt or Truman had kept him up to date on the Manhattan Project. Soviet intelligence was pretty good, so the Soviet Union had some idea of what was going on with the A-bomb, but Stalin felt very strongly that the secret nature of the project meant was a suspect and potentially hostile act by the United States. Secondly, the Lend-Lease aid the United States removed from the Soviet Union was diverted to Western Europe, and by late summer of 1945, it was clear that the United States was willing and eager to devote huge resources to rebuilding Western Europe, but that the Soviet sphere would receive no help. Again, for Stalin and his officials, this was a betrayal. Some dates of 1945. April 16th, the Soviets launched their final offensive, encircling Berlin. April 30, Hitler commits suicide. May 7th, Germany surrenders to the Western Allies. May 9th, Germany surrenders to the Soviets. August 6th, the United States drops an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. August 8th, the United Union declares war on Japan and invades Manchuria. August 9th, the United States drops an atomic bomb on Nagasaki. Having agreed in principle to unconditional surrender, on August 14th, Japan formally surrenders, ending World War II. The 6th of June of 1944 was the D-Day, when Allied forces landed in Normandy, France, to begin the liberation of Western Europe. Everyone hoped that war was soon over. However, there were many fires, battles in Europe and in the Pacific War with Japan before this fighting stopped. Life was very hard. Towns were bombed day and night. There was so little food or food that millions of people were cold and starving. Many people became homeless refugees. When Nazi Germany collapsed, after the successful Allied invasions of western France, Germany gathered reserve forces and launched a massive counter-offensive in the Ardennes, which collapsed by January. At the same time, Soviet forces were closing in from the east, invading Poland and East Prussia. By March, Western Allied forces were crossing the Rhine River, capturing hundreds of thousands of troops from Germany's Army Group B. The Red Army had meanwhile entered Austria and both fronts quickly approached Berlin. Strategic bombing campaigns by Allied aircraft were pounding German territory, sometimes destroying entire cities in a night. Then came the end of the Third Reich. As the Soviets took Berlin, Adolf Hitler committed suicide and Germany surrendered unconditionally on all fronts. So, what happened then with the United States and Japan? After the defeat of Japan in World War II, then the United States led the Allies in the occupation and rehabilitation of the Japanese state. Between 1945 and 1952, the United States occupying forces led by General Douglas A. MacArthur. In September 1945, General MacArthur took charge of the supreme command of Allied powers and began the work of rebuilding Japan. The occupation of Japan can be divided into three phases: the initial effort to punish and reform Japan, the work to revive the Japanese economy, and the conclusion of a formal peace treaty and alliance. By late 1947, the emergence of an economic crisis in Japan alongside concerns about the spread of communism sparked a reconsideration of occupation policies. This period is sometimes called the reverse course. In this stage of the occupation, which lasted until 1950, the economic rehabilitation of Japan took center stage. How do you think the World War II changed the world?
Well, I think it changed in many ways, both politically and maybe socially. In a way, it gave the United States a lot of power because when they defeated the Nazis, it sort of established the United States as the world power that it is today. And socially, I mean, it was like a precedent for the rest of history. Like we always meant not to repeat a world war like that because a lot of people died. But I mean, we still have the same problem with Syria, with Iraq. You know, I think even more people have died in this world war than the last one.
How do you define capitalism and communism?
Well, capitalism is both are economical sort of economical systems. Capitalism is based on the capita. You know, a group of people have a certain amount of money, which are then used to create industries, and the working class works for it, and it's kind of a chain of demand in which only there's really really rich people, and it's a lot of consumerism and stuff like that, which is most of our world today. Then we have communism, which philosophically it's supposed to give the same amount of wealth to everyone. Although that can also leading to totalitarianism and socialist kind of systems.
What do you think about the currently world situation?
Of the current world situation?
And the wars and all that stuff, and the natural disasters.
Oh my god. So, where do I start? Um, well, I think natural disasters are obvious. Some of them. I'm not saying all of them. I mean, earthquakes are complicated, but I think the hurricanes are definitely a symptom of global warming. I mean, you can see climate is evidently changing. I mean, a lot of people say it's just a natural evolution of climate. It's always been like that. I don't think so. I think we do have an impact on our current climate. And I mean, World War also is. I think it's because very little people have power, and especially the United States with Donald Trump have a specific, like, a specific agenda, and how they want to keep dominating that amount of wealth that they have in a capitalist world, and also how sometimes minorities are left behind, no matter if there are like a lot of people behind them, like, because they're still Syrians, because they're still the Eastern, not the Western world. They don't have a voice of their own. So I don't know. I think probably the end of the world is coming soon. So yeah, that's what I think.
Thank you.
Sure.
When we talk about the Holocaust, we talk about innocent deaths, injustices, and a cruel war. World War II should make us see how cruel humans can be just because they're seeking of a radical and sick thought. But the thought comes from a man, in this case, a perfect speaker that led a massive quantity of people and that had changed the life of millions of people and the history in the earth.